Georgia versus Alabama. One of the biggest games being played this college football season. We got the two kings of the South, two of the best coaches in the sport squaring off. Kirby Smart versus Kalen DeBoer. This is Kalen DeBoer's midterm exam. Wisconsin was a quiz. This is the midterm for Kalen DeBoer. And I got a lot of high praise for this dude. A lot of y'all are going to disagree with me, but I really believe that Kalen DeBoer is going to be the second coming of Nick Saban. He has won everywhere he's been. In 2 years at Washington, he took them to a national championship. And before he got there, that team was on the pit of about to become irrelevant. Jimmy Lake was about to run that program into the ground. And Kalen DeBoer came in, gave it some football CPR, gave it a little bit of soul, and he uplifted that program to a level that they haven't been since the freaking 90s. And he was winning national championships coaching NAIA football at some school called Sioux Falls that you probably can't even point out on the damn map. Kalen DeBoer is an outstanding football coach. Right now, in my opinion, he is currently the second best coach in college football, only behind Kirby Smart. Kirby Smart, as good as what he is, his kryptonite seems to be Alabama. Can Kirby Smart overcome his demons, which is playing the Alabama Crimson Tide? He's 1-5 against this team. You can truly say that Alabama is his kryptonite. I want you to think about something. Georgia, over these last couple of years, since 2021 to now, they've only lost, what, 2 games? And do you know who those 2 losses have come to? Alabama. That is an absurd stat. You pretty much would be undefeated over these last 2-3 years if it wasn't for one team that just always seems to be the thorn in your side. Alabama kept Georgia from possibly three-peating last year. They upset them in the SEC championship. For some reason, when Kirby Smart plays Alabama, it just is something that happens to him inside. I can't quite describe what happens to him, but Georgia just can't find a way to beat this team. And Kalen DeBoer, can he keep the tradition going of Alabama annually owning Georgia football? Georgia, they got a lot of concerns up front going into this game. Their offensive line has some injuries. You lose offensive guard Tate Ratledge, one of the best at his position in all of college football. He could be a future first-round pick next year. You got a few injuries on the defensive line. There are some guys that they currently are questionable for this game. And you don't have the same depth on the O-line and D-line this year that you've had in years past due to guys transferring out, due to the transfer portal. And Georgia has had historically great defensive lines from 2021 to 2022. And as much as a football factory as what this program is, there are going to be years when up front you just don't have that same level of talent that you've had in years past. It's hard to produce a historically great O-line, D-line every year. You got to be absolutely insane to do that. And this year it may look like they're a little bit down with the level of play that we normally see out of Georgia in the trenches. And their run game struggled against Kentucky. They got outgained on the ground by the Wildcats. And that Kentucky game was just really scary. And it kind of was a reality check for Georgia that, you know, they may not be the team that we thought they were coming into this year. And this game is going to show us if Georgia still is that team that we thought they were going to be coming into this year, because this is 1 out of 3 of the hardest games that Georgia's going to play this year, because your other 2 big games are on the road against Texas and Ole Miss, and you play 3 teams, including Alabama in this one, that are second in odds right behind you to win the SEC title. You got you being the favorite, Texas right behind you, Alabama, then Ole Miss. And there's a strong possibility that if Georgia loses this game, the next two games for you are must wins because another loss could potentially put you at risk of not only missing out on the SEC championship game, but then you could possibly miss out on being an auto bid in the college football playoffs. And, with how they looked against Kentucky, I don't think it's crazy to say that maybe they could go 9-3 this year. And then we have the discussion, could a 9-3 Georgia team still be in the college football playoffs? So, as much as everybody is talking about Kalen DeBoer and the big test that this game is for him, this game has a lot of implications for how Georgia's season could be going forward. Because if you can't win in Tuscaloosa, you mean to tell me that you can still win against Texas on the road? You probably should beat Ole Miss on the road. Ole Miss isn't the quality of team that you're facing in Alabama nor Texas. But this game is going to show a lot about just how truly good is Georgia going to be this season. Now, for Alabama, Jalen Milroe, for most, he is the current front runner for the Heisman Trophy. He's coming off a 5-touchdown performance against Wisconsin. And the last time he went up against Georgia and Kirby Smart's defense, he had 2 touchdowns and no interceptions, and he led Alabama to the win over the Bulldogs. Well, even though Georgia has some concerns up front, they still have a great defense. They got really good linebackers. They got a great secondary. They're 8th in the nation and yards per pass, 4.5. They're 9th in America in pass yards per game allowed. They got a really good run defense. Even though Kentucky was able to gash them, I think some of that was due to the lack of depth that they had. And their offense not being able to sustain drives kept that defense on the field for a lot of plays. And eventually they got worn out. But last time when Jalen Milroe went up against Georgia, I don't really think he played as good as what the stats show. He was only 13-23 passing. He had a few good throws that he made throughout that game. And he did have a big run late in the fourth quarter to pretty much seal the win for Bama. But Georgia has a lot of athletes that can keep up with Jalen Milroe's athleticism. Jalen Milroe is one of the most freakish athletes in all of college football. But Georgia has a lot of freak athletes on the defense. Malachi Starks, this dude had a crazy highlight reel interception against Clemson. And for as much talent as what Jalen Milroe has around him, he has this insane true freshman wide receiver, Ryan Williams, who's only 17 years old. Ryan Williams could go down as an all-time great for the Crimson Tide. And Matt, he's only 17 years old, and he's already this good. When he's 19 years old, he may be one of the youngest players that ever declared for the NFL draft. And if you are this good, this young, you have insane potential because his body, his physical potential hasn't even been reached yet. I've read something earlier that said that you don't reach your physical prime until you get into your early 20s. So Ryan Williams could be better maybe than what Devontae Smith was. Great route runner, explosive, downfield, vertical threat. You got Jam Miller, Justin Haynes, who are really good running backs. I love Jam Miller. He's probably my favorite running back in the country. Great vision, has fantastic contact balance. When he gets tackled, he falls forward for extra yards, and he's averaging nearly 10 yards per carry at 9.1 yards per pop. And Georgia against the run, they're 17th in America. We saw Kentucky have success on the ground against that Georgia front, but when you're going up against Alabama and you know that you got to account for Jalen Milroe's athleticism and what he does on the ground game, your whole game plan is going to be centered around, can Jalen Milroe beat us throwing the football? And when you think about the teams that have been able to beat Georgia and have success against Kirby Smart's defense, they've had quarterbacks that have been able to throw the football at a high level. And Jalen Milroe's growth is going to be on display in this game because I want to see just how improved is he throwing the football. It's one thing to look good against Wisconsin and USF. It's another thing to do it against one of college football's best defenses. And last year, your SEC championship performance to me could have been a little bit better in my estimation. So if Jalen Milroe truly is this quarterback that people believe he is, being the best in the nation, arguably, a lot of people feel he can win a Heisman Trophy. This is going to be a game where Jalen Milroe has to have his Heisman moment. If Jalen Milroe is going to win the Heisman this year, he needs to have a big game because Alabama, their offensive line still is a major concern. They've had some problems on that unit. They've already given up 8 sacks. Carson Beck has only been sacked 1 time despite the injuries that Georgia has had on that side. So the O-line still is a work in progress. And if you are Georgia, even though you lost to Jalen Milroe last year, you still have a great game plan for being able to hold him in check. He only had 29 rushing yards when they played in the SEC championship. So if you can hold him in check, force him to beat you throwing the football. I know it sounds cliche to say, but I'd rather have Jalen Milroe show me that he's an improved passer than just allow him to take this game over with his legs. And Kalen DeBoer gets a lot of praise for how good he is on the offensive side of the football. He was able to elevate Michael Penix to a Heisman finalist and a top 10 pick in the league. So if he can do the same thing for Michael Penix, you would think he can do the same thing for Jalen Milroe, a guy who, like Michael Penix, is really good throwing the deep ball, has really good accuracy outside of the numbers. But the thing with Georgia is that they don't surrender a lot of big plays in the passing game. You saw them just completely shut down Clemson's passing attack. And Clemson is going to be a good team this year. They're going to make it to the ACC championship, and they probably are going to be a playoff team this year. Kentucky, their offense is a lot better than what they looked against Georgia. They got some good receivers. It just is Brock Vandagriff wasn't that good because he didn't have a lot of time to throw the football due to how stout Georgia's pass rush is. So with the amount of talent that Georgia has on defense, they got guys who can hold Jalen Milroe in check. This is going to be a game that is going to be decided based off how efficient Jalen Milroe can throw the football. And Georgia offensively, their run game struggled against Kentucky. They had 30 attempts and only had 3.4 yards per carry. That's not really the standard that you expect from Georgia's rushing attack. Based off how much talent they have in that running back room, they did have some injuries going into that Kentucky game at that position. But Georgia normally is really deep at running back. But the reason why their run game struggled is because their offensive line wasn't that good in that game. Alabama has a really good defensive line. Kentucky had a really good defensive line. Deonte Walker is a projected first-round pick, and there's a couple of other cats on that Kentucky defense that are probably going to be NFL guys. So if you struggled against the D-line that you saw against Kentucky, imagine what's going to happen when you walk into Tuscaloosa and you see this physical, big, and strong Alabama D-line. Alabama, I don't think their defensive line is explosive, but I do think that they are really strong, and it's really hard to move the football on this front. And Carson Beck in his passing game were really off against Kentucky as well. Normally Carson Beck looks composed. He's a smooth operator, but he got rattled a little bit throughout that Kentucky game. And so did the rest of this passing offense. They weren't efficient in third down situations. Alabama secondary, though, they haven't really been tested. And their secondary was a big talking point going into this season because you got a lot of transfers and young guys who are going to be playing. Domani Jackson, Keon Sabb with transfers. Keon Sabb leads the team in interceptions, and you got a true freshman cornerback out there that gets significant playing time in Xavier Brown. So when you got a lot of transfers in there and a lot of young guys playing that haven't really been tested yet, you wonder if Georgia still is going to have the ability to get those big plays in the passing game. Are they going to be able to get back to the level of efficiency that we have been accustomed to seeing this offense operate as, with Carson Beck being the starting quarterback? Malachi Moore still is there, one of the best defensive players in all of college football. But Alabama secondary, we're going to find out just how good they are going up against this Georgia passing attack. And the offensive concerns for Alabama, We talked about earlier how their O-line is still inconsistent. They've given up a couple of sacks. They've given up 5. I think I said 8 earlier. And they got some turnover issues. They've already lost 4 fumbles this year. They only had 5 all last season. So this is an Alabama offense that has the problem of, kind of kicking themselves in the foot. And if Georgia can take advantage of Alabama's mistakes, like they definitely are capable of doing, because one thing about Georgia is that you don't want to give them extra possessions. They're really good when it comes to making the most of extra possessions. And for Alabama still having, concerns with their pass protection, I don't really know if Georgia's defense is going to give up more than 20 points in this game. And I expect this to be a low-scoring affair. I'm not somebody who really bets on the over-under win totals, but for this game, I may end up playing the under. I see this being more of a 2017, maybe 24-20 kind of game, because I see Georgia's offense bouncing back. Even though they may not be what they used to be on the offensive line, I still believe that they're more than capable of being able to hold their own up front. And Kirby Smart is normally good in games like this when Georgia's coming off a down performance. They didn't really play that well in their previous game. And in this matchup, it just means so much. Because although it may not be considered an official rivalry game, this game is a rivalry. Because it's a game between the gold standards of college football. The goal, if you are a head coach in this sport, is to be what Georgia and Alabama are. Of course, everybody has their own identity, but everybody wants to try to model their program after Georgia and Alabama. That's why everybody's always hiring their assistant coaches to be head coaches, because they kind of want to have the same infrastructure that these two teams have. So for a team like Georgia, it's hard to see them having 2 back-to-back road games where they struggle. And playing on the road in the SEC is difficult. But Georgia is an elite team. And elite teams have to win on the road. We saw Texas win on the road in Ann Arbor. And if Georgia is as good as what most of us expected them to be coming into this season, they should win this game. However, I'm taking the Crimson Tide to win, baby. I got the Tide 23-20 is my final score prediction in this game. I believe this is going to be a coming out party for Kalen DeBoer. A lot of people in the South still aren't really sold on this dude as a head coach down there in Tuscaloosa. Not saying that people think he's a bad coach, but I believe that people truly are underestimating just how good Kalen DeBoer is going to be and just how good he is. A lot of people weren't really watching him or paying attention to him at Washington until they started getting in the national spotlight. But everybody's about to find out just why he was the best replacement for Nick Saban. He's a great football mind. He does a great job of having his team well prepared. And he has a really good track record in games of this magnitude against top 25 opponents. You can't say that this is going to be a new atmosphere for Kalen DeBoer, because the dude played in the freaking college football playoffs and won a playoff game against Texas. Texas is considered to be an elite team this year. So if you can win a playoff game, that shows that you got more than enough experience to play in a game of this magnitude and have your team ready to play. So this is a tough game to pick. It really can go either way, but I like the Tide because they do have the home field advantage. Alabama has only lost in Tuscaloosa a handful of times over the last decade. And Georgia, I don't think this is the same Georgia teams that we've been accustomed to seeing in the past. They don't really have as much depth as what they've had in years prior. And I see that coming into the mix when I make my decision for this pick, because listen, if Kentucky's having success running the football against you, Alabama should be able to do the same. You got to worry about Jalen Milroe. You got to worry about their running backs as well. You're not going to give up like 200 rushing yards if you're Georgia, but you probably could give up a cool 120 on the ground, and that could be enough for them to win this game. because offensively, you may not be able to do too much against Alabama's defense. Even with the concerns in their secondary, they are talented. It's just that, is that secondary as good as what it should be? So for me, I like Alabama in this spot. I love Kalen DeBoer as a head coach. I'm not really being biased. Like, I really do believe this dude is a truly great coach, and he's going to end up being an all-time great. And Kirby Smart continues to struggle against Alabama. So I like the Tide to win.